Welcome to Treading the Path of Heaven. My name is Seth Thompson and not Jonathan Kinney. I am not the normal guy who does that, but I did my best Kinney impression. This episode is a little bit different than our normal episodes. We are interviewing Pyrenose of The Tutorial is Too Hard. He is the former editor. This was recorded before Moonpia reached out to the people involved in translating, editing, hosting this novel. So we definitely want to note that. We also want to note that we edited some of the content of the interview at our guest's request. So excuse any choppiness or anything like that. But we did get some really good insight into the industry from someone that is inside of it. So I really hope you enjoy this. Have a great podcast.
The following podcast may contain spoilers.
Hi, this is Jonathan Kinney, host of the Treading the Path of Heaven podcast, and we're excited to be with you again. This time we've got kind of another special episode, one of our Enlightenment series. We are joined today by Pyrenose, a translator that worked on Death Mage Who Doesn't Want a Fourth Time, and more notably, The Tutorial is Too Hard. We're very excited to have him here with us today. As usual, I'm joined by my co-hosts.
I'm Richard.
I'm Seth.
Yeah.
Pyrenose?
Yeah, I'm Pyrenose. Well, technically not a translator. I'm an editor, but...
I'm sorry, editor. My bad.
It's
Your
fine.
brain, it broke.
Yeah.
So, well, I appreciate you agreeing to do an interview with us today, Pyrenose, but I had a few questions. Could you explain what exactly an editor does?
Okay, so an editor is basically someone who takes the translated raws. That means like a translator first looks at the raws, they translate it into English, and then they send it to an editor. And then the editor goes through, looks for grammatical mistakes, syntax errors, punctuation, all of that good stuff. And sometimes editing can mean a lot more. Sometimes it's rearranging how sentences work.
Sure, for like a better flow and
syntax.
stuff.
And then sometimes it's adding euphemisms to either enhance the storytelling. But like that part is kind of it's not very firm. So it's really up to a case-by-case kind of thing.
Kind of more like an art than a science kind of deal.
Yeah, there's no strict rule to it, but there's like a base level. Like you have to know your grammar, you have to know what comma splices are, how to fix them, and stuff like that.
For sure.
Okay.
How much localization you think goes into the editing you've done?
Can you clarify what you mean by localization?
I mean, phrasing, like, for example, say there's a reference or a joke that wouldn't quite make sense in English. You'd localize it so it would work in,
English.
in our tongue. Yeah.
Like an aphorism that exists in English or has a very similar one to,
Yeah, so when it gets to that part, me and usually a translator usually work together to try to incorporate the joke as much as we can. And if it's just
Gotcha.
if it's something like wordplay, which like just doesn't make sense in English at all, like
Right.
we put in a translator's note or a proofreader's note and say like, this is a reference to blah blah blah, which is like Korean lore or something else. So.
Mhm.
I can always say I personally really enjoy those kind of notes. I feel like those really help me get insight into the different cultures that the series I'm reading come from. So I really appreciate that decision when it does happen.
Yeah, actually, sometimes without the notes, you actually miss out on a lot of things. Because, for example, in The Tutorial is Too Hard, one of the recurring jokes is about Hojae's name, which is just how like the beast people pronounce it, like Kiri Kiri
Yeah.
and Myung Myung Myung. Like, if you without my translator telling me that it was actually like his name literally meant something with that goes along the lines of "I'll tell you and later." That's literally what his name means. Like I would have never thought of that. Like the first time I read it, I was like, "Wow, wait, why am I just never going to hear what Hojei's name means in the Beast People's language?" And then when my translator finally explained it to me, my most recent one, actually, Basil, he explained to me so much more depth to this series that I just never realized. So yeah, the footnotes are super important.
Of course, it's a goofy pun. Of course, in that game,
Yeah,
of
no,
course,
that's-
in that book, it would be a goofy pun
Yeah,
for Hojei's name.
Yeah, I
Oh, wow.
definitely never picked up on that, so that's incredible.
yeah, that's actually
That's why
one.
this is Enlightenment.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that is actually really funny
That's
for
what we're
those
here
interactions
for.
with Kiri. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of, that's a natural transition. So you mentioned you've done editing for the tutorials Too Hard.
Yeah.
What else have you done editing for?
I think when I still worked with Light Novel Bastion, I used to do a little bit of work on the Death Mage doesn't want to die a fourth time. I think that's what it's
Yeah.
called. I just
Yeah.
know it as Death Mage. But when I actually first started out on Light Novel Bastion, I worked on Max Level Newbie for a couple of chapters.
Mm.
I have some on my hard drive actually, but even before Light Novel Bastion, I think I tried to work with Kobato-chan Daisuke.
Okay.
Familiar with that?
Yeah.
For me, I don't think KCDS, which is just shorthand for it, was really the environment that I really wanted to be working in. And eventually, I sort of just drifted away from that, and I committed more towards Light Novel Bastion.
What
Okay.
what there made you feel like less comfortable being there? Like what was the approach they took that Light Novel Bastion took a better approach to?
So working at KCDS was a very independent kind of environment. You talk to your translator, and you just communicated over Discord what needed to be done and whatnot. And
Sure.
there was no set release schedule. There was no one was like sort of just grinding on us to like get stuff done. And when I moved over to Light Novel Bastion, like when I really committed, there was like I had a responsibility to meet 3 chapters a week for tutorial, or I think it was 2 or 1 chapter per week for max level newbie. It was I think I sort of liked it because like part of me is intrinsically lazy, so like having the deadline really helped me get stuff together.
Yeah,
No,
structure
that makes
is
perfect
always
sense.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're all a little bit lazy. It's just a matter of tricking ourselves to not be.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, having someone keeping you accountable is really helps in terms of getting stuff done.
Definitely. I mean, it wasn't as if like, it was like, you need to edit 3 chapters or I'm going to threaten you or something. It was just more like, we really want you to do 3 chapters and we hope that you can take up this responsibility. But if you can't, we can always have someone help you out. And
Yeah.
it was good, I think. I owe a lot to the person who manages Light Novel Bastion. He recently just got back to being active a little bit. He was on hiatus for a little bit, but I'm really thankful for what he did.
So
I'm actually surprised about the KCDS. I didn't know you did stuff there. What novel over there?
Yeah, that was actually the first place I started at, but it was a really short stint because I just didn't have the motivation to keep on working, and I think that's what really like I told myself like if I'm not going to give KCDS like 100% or at least like 70% of my free time, then like why am I part of this? You should like my work philosophy is that you should when you go for something, you should go for it to your best ability. Sometimes that doesn't mean 100%. Sometimes it doesn't even mean 50. But it should at least always be on your mind enough that you can say, yeah, I need to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like having a budget and like knowing that you don't have to exactly stick by it, but you can move stuff around, but always that number is in the back of your head.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
What novel was it that you were having trouble with?
On KCDS,
Yeah.
that it was called Rise Strongest Warrior. I think you can still find it on their site. It has, I think, 13 chapters. Like towards the end, I just got really unenthusiastic about it. I started dropping off, and eventually the translator quit too. But it's kind of regrettable because I thought the novel had good potential once you got past 10 or so chapters. But at the same time, it was very difficult to edit, especially since like this is my first time editing anything. So because there were a lot of fragments and I didn't know how to deal with them, and I was just like, wait, this is technically grammatically incorrect, but do I want to preserve the style of the author, or do I want to try to make things correct? And just so we're clear, like making things correct doesn't always mean like, oh, the readers can like interpret it, can have an easier time interpreting it.
Like, how hard was it to capture the nuance, and how did the workflow change from like Rise Strongest Warrior over to like Max Level Newbie?
Max Level Newbie, I think, actually has some wonderful syntax. It's not like, oh, English teacher, professor kind of level, but I think it's, when you translate it, it's very readable. It follows a lot of the normal sentence structure. You don't just have like random fragments thrown around, though there are some, I think, for stylistic purposes. Like, I can respect that. But
For sure.
in some other novels, like when it's written in Korean, it's not necessarily incorrect because Korean has different syntax rules than English. But when you translate it, then it becomes incorrect. And then you have to go through this whole loop of fixing it and then thinking you did too much or thinking you did too little to fix it.
Now, does the light novel Bastion or what was it, Rebirth? Did they have anyone like a head copy editor that would go over things to like go over your work, or was it just like
no,
you
actually,
look at it and it just releases?
I look at it and my translator looks at it, because personally, I think I'm more of an active proofreader. I take phrases and ask them, yes, what is the author trying to say? What do you mean by this? What do you want the reader to feel? And if like the phrase or the word has the wrong connotation, or it just doesn't work at all, like I talk to my translator and I say like, hey, this doesn't work out, or we need to do some research on this and see if there's like really a double meaning here or if there isn't. So it's really just me and my translator just working things out. There is no copy editor or anything that like goes over everything.
Now, has there ever been a situation where you had a problem with a specific like, phrasing of something and you had pushback from your translator? What ends up happening in those situations?
I think for me, I struggle a lot with that kind of stuff because I tend to want to stylize the writing so it better enhances the feeling that the reader has from reading it, but is not necessarily like the literal closest to the raw kind of translation. And when it comes to that, we discuss it. And it's not anything uncivil, but oftentimes we have these long conversations over Discord text and tell each other like, what does he mean by this? But I think he means something else. So how can we make a compromise between the two different interpretations? How do we balance our need for correctness and also the need to preserve the author's style?
Okay. So kind of moving back a little bit to your work with your first translation. What brought you to your decision to start getting into editing?
Oh man. Before I really started editing, I was just like a lurker on the internet. One of my favorite series was Everyone Else is a Returnee by
It's a great book.
yes, it is an
I
amazing.
should have. That was one of our actually last episodes. We're gonna do a full episode on it soon. We just did
Yes.
like a short one.
It has a lot of critics that are just like, oh, harem is kind of generic and whatnot. But personally, I thought it was really good. I enjoyed it. Chamber, who translated it, I actually talked to him a couple times. He's a really cool guy, super dedicated, and it got me really interested. Sorry.
No
It's okay.
problem.
Yeah, it got me interested, and because it was hosted on KCDS, I was just like, oh yeah, you guys might not look like you need help, but I'll just send in an application anyways.
No, that follows completely. That's why I know. That's why I know them is because that's where I was reading Everyone Else is Returning.
Yeah,
Perfect. Nah, full circle.
yeah.
All right, awesome.
If you don't mind me asking, I noticed there's most of the novels you worked on have been Korean. Is there a deeper reason for that? Do you speak some Korean, or it's just like your preference for novel?
Actually, there's no real preference. For me, it's always been more about the work I can do compared to the work that everyone else has done. There's nothing distinct from like a Korean work and a Chinese work in my view, because my job as an editor is to look over it and say, does this make sense grammatically? Are we preserving the meaning here? So it's really been no preference to me. I think it just happens that all of the novels that I've worked on are just Korean.
Okay.
So it sounds like a couple of the places you've worked editing have assigned you books, and were you able ever to select your own books? Is like, are some of these books that you were personally interested in, and you're like, ooh, I'd love to edit that one?
Uh, I remember when the admin at Light Novel Bastion first talked to me. He gave me like an option of selecting max level newbie, tutorial, and I think something else. And I actually didn't select tutorial because my first impressions of like I read the first few chapters of tutorial, and my first impression was that wow, this is a lot of fragment. This is a lot of kind of stream of conscious kind of thing that's going to be really hard to edit, that might not make sense, that I might struggle with. So I chose max level newbie too because I actually like the premise of max level newbie a little bit better, but as I think translation slowed down for max level newbie, I just got moved. And for me, it just didn't really matter. Like, I was editing, I was doing something that I enjoyed, I was giving back to the light novel community, and I was really just thankful that there was just no work. Like, that there was work instead of not having any work at all and just sitting there.
Yeah. There
It
was
was a
something to do, and
situation.
it was fun. It was a fun thing to do for you. So, like, whatever, good for everybody.
Yeah.
In the highest point of you editing, about how much time a week you think you were spending doing editing?
That's sort of a hard question because when I first started Light Novel Bastion, I said that like back when I started doing tutorial, it was 3 chapters a week, and I remember spending so much time like just looking over the first chapter, and then by the second and third chapter I was like super exhausted, but I knew that like, oh, I need to get these 3 chapters out, so there would be less time spent. But in terms of like just quantity of chapters that I put out, that was probably the peak. But for like most time spent, I think it would actually be like in the recent months, because before like this, the whole thing with Munpyo worked out, like I was spending a solid 1.5 to 3 hours on every chapter. I think because it wasn't just me editing, it was also a lot of research because, like I said, once my translator told me all of these like inside jokes and all this random stuff that I just never picked up on, I started doing a lot more research into why the author said this, like what is he talking about. And me and my
why would that be funny?
yeah, and like we often talked about the meanings behind it, our personal experiences reading tutorial and how they differed. There was just a lot of stuff like that.
Let's get to something a little bit less technical. Can I get your what's your favorite part of tutorial of the stuff you did work on? What was your favorite part of its story?
Where'd you come in? Like where'd you start translating? I'm sorry, where'd you start editing? Jesus.
I started editing at chapter 67, if I remember correctly. So it's been a while, but one of my favorite arcs was the Day of Great Harmony, where because for me, like I like to think of myself as a romantic, so I really envy and I really like the relationship between Park Jung-ah and Ho-jae.
Yeah,
so, like for me, those two are just so adorable together. And I remember this scene where Park Jung-ah was playing around with the Thousand Arms and she was making them into guns, and I thought that was like sort of adorable. And
when she made the rings, yeah.
Just like, come on, man, make a
do
move
the thing.
already.
You can make your stupid weapons into these. Just do it real quick, and then change it back. I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, Great Day of Harmony, definitely my favorite arcs. I mean, there was also a lot of depth in the interaction between Ho-jae and the other characters.
Absolutely.
Like, Kim Min-hyuk. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce any of their names. Like, it sounds out perfectly in my mind, but I can't pronounce any of them.
We all know
it sounds better than anything I've ever heard myself pronouncing. So
yeah, but damn, like their bantering relationship is really fun.
Like, I absolutely agree. I really like the relationship between those two because they're both represented as such like competent, hard individuals, and so like it's really interesting to see this kind of softness that comes out when they're together, and they don't know whether to to let that happen or whether to try and stay hard. It's a very interesting relationship.
Yeah, it's also like everyone's trying to push Ho-jae and Park Jung-ah together, which I think is pretty cute, and I respect. It's very fluffy.
Like see, I was interpreting it as like the whole relationship being kind of toxic. For each other, technically, because the problem with Ho-jae and what the story keeps repeating in his narrative, to me at least, is because Ho-jae himself is so broken.
Yeah.
He's actually like a poor influence on Park Jung-ah, both romantically and because considering the situation of the relationship being that, you know, Ho-jae was her first example of a savior and handing her the first reins of power she's had since she's been in the situation, kind of went to her head, like kind of turned her into the monster she became, you know? It's
so
like
you're saying it's partially she is who she is because of him, but then also there's like built-in hero worship in there that is unhealthy for a relationship.
100%. I mean, think about it. Like, her being on edge was like the punishment she took from those dudes in the first room. Yeah. And then you meet this dude who's basically a walking demon, hands you a gun and you kill a dude. Yeah. And suddenly that's the dude who, you know, you're in love with, who you give your shit to. Like, I mean, it's a little toxic, man. I've been in some toxic relationships. It's a bit toxic.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree in that. Like, I think the author, I don't think it necessarily started out toxic, but I think the author definitely is portraying that it leans that way, given how their relationship is referenced when talking about him being on the 60th floor.
I think like part of me sees it as romantic because I so desperately want them to get together. It's like it's like you're rooting for such a tragic hero, and it's not about like him getting together in the end. It's about the process in which they get close, and then you cry, you bawl your eyes out when they just don't end up together, and you just stare at the novel and you're just like, what am I doing with my life, you know?
Why am I reading this? That hurts me.
Yeah. Like, why am I reading this at 3 a.m., you know?
No, I absolutely get that. I'm a romantic myself, so I tend to have relationships and novels that I always want to see succeed. But theirs is very interesting, to say the least.
The Passion Island did that to me. The Passion Island,
Fuck
like
the
where they
Island.
can connect via emotions, and he actually got to like feel real connection for the first time in forever. Good.
So, let's talk about the fact that this is probably never going to get an anime, but if there were ever an anime, the Island arc would destroy people. Like people would be crying. Like it would be incredible. It would be like Red Wedding level.
God, the Island arc, part of me was just so frustrated because, and it felt so, I felt kind of mad when I was editing it, actually, because I was watching Hojie fall down a path that made him weak, that made him like more vulnerable than he's ever been.
Yep.
And at the same time, it made me feel a little bit vulnerable, and it was very uncomfortable, which, like, props to the author and the translator for really doing that.
Yeah, I think the emotions of that arc, and I mean, so many arcs in this series come through really strongly. I think that's really the strength of the series, in my opinion, is how well the author and the translation has been able to depict the loneliness, the entrance of the psychosis of the main character, and just like all the different ways that he's being pulled at is what I really enjoy about the novel.
I really appreciate the descriptive bits of the fucking battle monks, like the Tower of Battle Monks.
Oh yeah, that floor. That floor is nuts.
That was
actually nuts.
Yeah, that was a really cool floor, and I really liked just the description of the progression of power. Like it was really well done. Like I
Part of me like tries to understand, because sometimes when I edit, like, it's just like, why is the author doing this again, or why is my translator writing this again? And sometimes I just don't pick up on the stylistic choices, and then it becomes so frustrating because, like, I may think it's bad, but then everyone else thinks it's great, so I'm a little confused here. And then I have to have someone explain it to me, usually my translator, like, explain why this scene is so great, and I'm just like, oh,
I get it now.
Get it. Yeah.
So I'm kind of a great when it comes to these things. But
man, you're doing your best, and that definitely comes across on the page. Like your effort is noted.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and move past that for a little bit. I could talk about Tutorials Too Hard forever, and I have.
No, that's true. We've had numerous discussions about it. It's great.
But let's get into the nitty gritty, I guess. So, as everyone known, they read the post you made.
Yes.
Tutorials Too Hard being dropped.
For people who aren't completely aware.
I think, for me, it's kind of hard to explain this because I think I'm going to give a little bit backstory first.
Sure.
Yeah, please.
A couple of months before, like, we decided that we're going to no longer be formally translating tutorial. It was just like, my translator was just, we were both getting a little tired of people who were complaining that, like, oh, why isn't this faster? Why aren't you guys doing this, and this? And for us, like, for me especially, I understood because I used to do 3 chapters a week, and I was like, oh my god, I'm literally down to 1 to 2 chapters a week. I think I've gotten so much slower. And like my translator expressed his concern, or not really a concern, but it was just like, why are people complaining so much, considering that A, this is free, and B, like we're putting in like a ton of effort into doing this. Like there's a Reddit thread, and it basically ended up in the now rather infamous spreadsheet of like costs and whatnot, the cost of translating tutorial. And that was just, when I released it, I felt like, what have I done? For me, I understand that the novel translation community is almost like 100% fan driven. But at the same
Yes.
time, you have to look at things from the other perspective. My translator was telling me that technically all chapters are locked on Moonpia and Kakao pages, which is another platform for readers, and you have to pay like 10 cents or something roughly about that in Korean won in order to view it. And we're just putting it out here for free.
Mm-hmm.
So isn't this piracy? Isn't this sort of like looking isn't this sort of like downloading or watching a movie that just has subtitles in a different language? Like, I
Yeah.
think I had the privilege of seeing both sides of sides of the argument, because at the same time, at that point I had been working as just like a volunteer editor for I think almost 1.5 years, and like I've never gotten any kind of monetary compensation for that. So when my translator brought it up, I was like, you know what? I think it's time to make things clear that these things have monetary value, but we're not demanding it. And that was what I really tried to say in my spreadsheet. I think some people took it out of context, or some people didn't read the disclaimer at the top that says neither the editor or the translator is demanding this money, where this is just here for transparency purposes. I know I sound a little passive aggressive when I say that, but when I went through the Reddit thread later that was like discussing like the post with the spreadsheet, I thought people had taken it out of context. Like, we're not asking for money. We're just putting it out here that our work is not just something that like it's whatever. Like there
Yeah, no,
is a
I think I can get where you're coming from. You've had a lot of people like either complaining or like reaching out to you to talk about like, hey, why isn't like we're demanding a better product, but you're like you said, you're doing this for free. Like you're not
To chime in
you're putting it
here
out there for
and
free and all that sort of thing. So
to chime here and defend that, though, there's a lot of other novels that are also put out for free that are given donations off, from people like from their heart. Because to be frank, because it is in your IP and the way translations work and the way that like your work is yours, but the IP isn't. And because this is a place where the work is unavailable legally, unavailable period here, there's a gray area there where you can receive donations for it, but it became a like to defend, not so much to like discredit you or your translator, but to defend other people. That's just how this community has always been. And two, there was a little bit of a lack of tact in some of you guys' posts and the things that even like your what T.L. Basil was saying in his in that infamous announcement thing he did, because it was not the tact on that any goodwill you guys may have had got destroyed in that one post.
I can also note that it has been deleted from his website. Like I actually went to go find that spreadsheet again, and I can't. The website tlbasil.com no longer has a link to it, as far as I can tell.
I think, there was a lot. There was a lack of tact, because, to be honest, I thought it was a bad idea to respond to anyone at all until like we really discussed it and we said, you know what, this is what we want to put out. But I think our rashness and our hot-headedness got to us, and considering that like our age, our personality, and whatnot is no excuse for what we've done. But I think we just had a lot of miscommunication, and that just ended out poorly. So
Could you care to explain what you guys were trying to do regarding connecting with the initial offer? Mainly because Munpia themselves were the ones to like deal with, right? Or did you guys try to reach out to the offer? Because you have to do both, and that
we
seems like
actually
a.
did reach out to the author Gandhara. So
Mhm.
what happened was that Gandhara is technically under a contract with the Korean companies. So
Yes.
like we have to talk to the Korean companies. And they didn't want to deal with us, because we didn't have a proper company backing, which
Yep.
I have noticed on novel updates forums have said that are like, oh, you guys were really naive. Yes, we were naive, but it wasn't like it was just out of pure naive naivety. Because if you guys know this other site called Oppa Translations, they
Yes.
did a series called Chemistry that I really liked for a while, and they got the rights to like really establish an English translation, which was what we were hoping for. We didn't do enough research into them, which is probably why we didn't fail. Because maybe if we were more like them and we had like proper licensing and whatnot, maybe it would have worked out. But for me, that wasn't the focus.
Unfortunately, if you're doing anything with money in this current industry, there's a lot of
Yeah,
gray areas there. Like that there's legal gray areas. Even people with a lot more influence and bigger projects than you guys have run into problems constantly, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I know.
I respect the audacity of what you guys were trying to do. And clearly you understand where you're coming from. It's just,
Yeah, I can definitely understand I definitely understand your position though. Like
I
it's
think it
you kind
was
of felt like you were under a moral imperative to try and make it more official. But
I
I get
can,
both sides. I think.
yeah, I can understand the gray area because, as Richard mentioned, there's not a way for us to legally buy an English copy of the tutorial is too hard. Like we can't
yeah.
buy chapters. If we could buy chapters straight from Moonpia, then we would do that. But that's not an option for us. So, the 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 whole, I would say, a large chunk, at least, of the web novel community is like that.
Informal.
So, like that very much, but
Yeah.
there is a larger chunk than not. It feels like that are translating works that are like copyright, as it were. So, I guess a good question is: did you hope to like start like a trend in the other direction? Did you hope to like spur other people to try and get like on your side? Like as I'm thinking about it like this: there's a lot of people going the one way, and you guys chose to like turn around and go the opposite way. What were you intending to accomplish outside of like just the moral imperative?
I think for me, like when I started following novel updates forums, like it was back when Wuxia World had they had just gotten into maybe their second or third argument with Chidian, and this was when Chidian was really expanding, and like I think it was right after they signed a contract with Gravity Tales.
oh, the gravity stuff.
Oh right, right then.
Oh
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Gravity
man.
Tales.
everyone.
Oh
I'm.
no.
I think so. For me, like I think it was just uh I was seeing the formalization of a market in a way. Like personally, I don't think that uh novel translations are going to be fan driven things forever. Like as sad as that seems to be, for future readers, like I don't see like a future where at least like 50% of the novels are like translated by companies like Wuxia World, at least, who have actual legal standing. And I understand that it's very young, and maybe like this is just me speculating way too far into the future.
Fair enough.
But I think that really contributed to a bit of the naiveness, and we were a little bit short-sighted when we got to the whole thing with Munpia about tutorial.
My question here is, do you mind giving me some context on why y'all decided to do the poll thing, and then immediately move to the paywall? Like, what triggered that right there, that decision?
Okay, I think I'm gonna need a little more clarification on paywall, because I think your definition of a paywall might be different from mine, which is so. Can you explain what your definition of a paywall means? I just want to know this, so like we're clear and we're discussing the same term.
The way I see it here is, say, paywall works the same way it does with, like, say, let's use Crunchyroll.
Yeah.
Crunchyroll has a free service that you can watch an episode. What is it? 2 weeks after it was simulcast. Free. But if you were to pay through the payroll, you get it immediately. There's no waiting. A lot of things have, like, Hulu. Hulu has a set number that are free. They give a little bit rolling more, and then if you pay for the full service, you get everything. You get the simulcast, the simultaneous release. A lot of other translators have a similar system where if you are Patreon, you get the stuff a little bit early. They have a set number of free ones they release, but if you're on the Patreon, you get it earlier. Even some of the Chidian translators even have, like, Patreon. You can read a little bit early, but if you have premium, you can read this a little bit early, but you get a slightly distributed. But if you're free, or you do the Spirit Stones, you get this at this rate, right?
Okay, so I think there's an important distinction to make between paywalls. So my version of a paywall is you just have chapters that you need to just straight up pay in order to access. There's nothing free. It's sort of like the Spirit Stone system that Chidian has implemented, where you get a certain number of Spirit Stones and then you have to pay for each next chapter with your own Spirit Stones. And the version that you're talking about, I feel like, is more of like a delayed release, where it's kind of like, yeah, we're coming stuff out with free, but if you choose to support us, we can get you stuff a little early.
So that is a fair viewpoint, but it's still technically a paywall, especially considering what the distribution speed of the free version is compared to what you get for paying. Like, but again, that is literally like can legally cause trouble.
Yeah,
with, like,
each of you have just stated what you mean by paywall, and we can go like past that now. So like.
Well, no, I mean, like that, like the only reason I bring that up is some people feel like that could also cause more legal trouble in this fine gray line, right?
Right,
because if what you offer is a service, not the actual IP itself. So if you're hiding the IP behind more of the wall, it becomes more of a legal reason people can come after you guys, you know?
Yeah, I see your perspective. For us, like, the Patreon system was just something that we saw other people do, and we were just like, oh, I mean, I'm pretty sure there were like at least a couple people who would support us on Patreon. So let's let them support us, and we'll work harder for them. And I get what you're saying about the disparity between like the quality of service that like Patreons receive and that like people who don't have Patreon receive. Like, because I think one of the biggest points of contention was that Basil's raw translating speed was about 7 chapters a week, and like because I just literally can't edit faster. Mine was somewhere I could only release somewhere between 2 to 3 chapters a week.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were concerned that like, oh, so like Basil's gonna finish the entire novel by himself, and we're stuck like waiting for our 2 to 3 chapters a week. Like, I think that was the major concern, and
See,
if it wasn't,
that's a fair. See, this statement right here, that should have been communicated because that is a fair reasoning behind your release schedule. Like that is incredible. That's an incredible amount of information. Continue.
yeah, I'm sorry. Like, I think, like I said before, like we were just really hot-headed. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I was frustrated that my translator was getting shit from people who obviously felt the need to express their complaints in a very rude way to him, and I was frustrated because like when your colleague is frustrated, you just can't help but be frustrated too.
Yeah,
So
you're
comrades in
an
arms.
empathetic person.
An insult against them is an insult against you.
so if that was a really important piece of information, I'm sorry we didn't include it, but that was literally how it was. So
Yeah, that does give a lot of context for the situation.
Yeah, that's
so
huge
good to hear.
context.
Yeah, there was always a rumble of like, this book's so slow. Like that would have been info.
I think I should have made it more clear that under no circumstance was I building up like a stockpile of like 50 chapters, which I think, actually, now that I think about it, I think a lot of people were concerned about like, oh, they're trying to make money out of this. But I am literally editing from week to week. Sometimes I have one extra chapter stored up, and maybe that's my excuse to be lazy for next week.
Oh,
Right.
Gotcha.
But when Basil finished translating, our plan was always to initially, like, right now, release 2 to 3 chapters a week, and then just build on a stockpile by working a little bit harder and keeping up the same work schedule. And then when Basil finished translating, which I actually am not sure how many chapters tutorial has left, but I know there aren't a lot. Like when he finished translating, like then I would continue my work pace at like 3 chapters a week, but we would be releasing more per week. Like we would be releasing 4 or 5 chapters per week. So yeah, that was
the plan.
I think this was just a tragedy for us in a way that we just alienated everyone else.
Like it really just like I really wish like what you're saying here. I really wish that was because like this completely explains a lot of the phrasing that you guys were trying to use because like initially it seemed to a casual reader. Yeah. And that's why they were like, what? Because they're like there's mad translators that, you know, legit would do more than that. And they do it all themselves and not do what you guys were phrasing. Like there's a line where he's like, "Oh, a copy editor makes what $18 an hour and all that." Like that wasn't needed, man. You guys,
I'm not gonna lie. Like, I think my translator could really use some work, like on the finesse of his language. And personally, I didn't respond. Like, I have a Reddit account, but I don't respond because.
Why would you? He's doing his own talking.
Why would you? And at the same time, it's also, why are you trying to explain yourself? Because for me, at the moment, I felt like I was perfectly understandable. And obviously, I wasn't. So I probably should have put a better effort out there to say, like, no, I think you guys are getting something wrong. And say, like, this is really what we're trying to say. But it's just regrettable miscommunication.
We're definitely trying to help you get a platform to get anything you wanted to say out. So hopefully this will
that's what we're here for.
help some people understand the context like it helped us.
Yeah, I mean, if it makes any of you guys feel better, like okay, so I'm gonna talk about the negotiations with Munpia, and we didn't sign like a non-disclosure agreement or anything, so all of this is perfectly like good. It's just that
okay.
for the most part, we'd like not to talk about this, but
Yeah, it's up to you. If you don't feel comfortable discussing it, feel free to not go forward. But as much as you're comfortable discussing it, we'd love to hear.
Moonpia have contacted, like, at least my translator and said, oh, yeah, we're looking to actually release our own English translation. And, like, that's kind of a gray area for us, because once something goes official, we're kind of just, like, bootlegged copy, but...
Yeah, absolutely.
And, like... I was concerned, and my translator was concerned. So what we did is that in our post, we wrote that we're no longer formally translating tutorial. And you have to watch the wording here because it's formally.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that, like, chapters 191 to 200 were taken down when, or were they ever actually released? I know we took down a bunch of chapters from Rebirth Online World, and then we took down chapters from Patreon right after we like stopped people from contributing or whatnot. And we basically said, okay, so my translator doesn't want to, like, he doesn't want to be under liability for lawsuit.
Yeah.
And because he is very closely related to Korea, is what I'm going to say. Like, I understand his fear for a lawsuit. Like, for me, I live in the United States. DMCA, whatever, man. I'll just take it down within 30 days. Like,
Yeah.
Timeline. But I'm not sure how laws work over there. But
I mean, Korean laws are kind of like they affect a Korean citizen everywhere, in the world. Like, you could be a Korean citizen in America, and Korean law affects you. So it's like, it's pretty raw.
Like, I think that was some legal gray area. Or it wasn't legal gray area. It was just like, we were really fucking scared. And
yeah, I get that.
If you guys will look at the chat really quick.
Okay. All right.
That is a drive to basically the tutorial chapters up to 200, which is what Basil had translated and I edited. And that's all that I have right now. But when I say that we're no longer translating tutorial, I mean that tutorial is no longer a priority because it's just such a liability.
I mean, he doesn't want to put himself at risk.
If someone wants to take our chapters and, like, post them somewhere, like, you do that. As much as I hate saying those 3 words, you do that. It does, as long as it doesn't have any link to us, I'm fine with it. Because as long as me and Basil aren't liable for a lawsuit, I'm fine with anything at this point.
Did they give you a formal, like, stop translating this, or was it like we intend to translate, so we can't partner with you?
It was we intend to translate, but it wasn't just so. It was, I think, I'm saying this as, like, a third observer, so I can't say for sure, but I think it was more of something along the lines of, like, we're intending to do this, so we're intending to come out with an English version, so you might want to stop.
Gotcha.
Politely imply that you should probably stop.
Because as soon as we do it, we're going to shut it down. That's basically...
Yeah, so, like, that was the connotation I got from it. And
that makes perfect sense. If that's the response I got from a Korean company, I think I might make a similar decision, because, I mean...
Yeah, so... I don't know.
You're not going to be able to finish.
Yeah, I actually don't know if Basil really plans to put more time and stuff into this. But personally, like, tutorial it's practically been my life's work. Like, I started editing this maybe 3, 4, 5 months after I just started editing in general. And for me, it's always about, I go where the series goes, because it's not about, me being comfortable. It's about me giving back to the community that really helped me, and me trying to do my best.
For sure.
So that is that. Like,
So just for clarity's sake, someone like Raising the Dead, as fucking not active as they seem to be of late, um, they would be cool to come along and try if there's like not any movement, because like as you say, it's not that far off from finished. So if somebody
yeah,
wanted to just put in the effort and like fucking slam it out, then
yeah.
you guys would be okay with that, like
I
for
can't speak for my
completion.
translator. I can't speak for my translator, but I would say yes.
Yeah, as long
Okay,
as it
fair
doesn't
enough.
implicitly put you in the way of a lawsuit in any way. Yeah.
My translator is unfortunately not of my circumstance, so
Yeah.
I have to respect that. If
No,
I
that
were
makes sense. I mean, Korean
like,
companies have the ability to put a lot of pressure on people in Korean society, as I understand it. So
I'm not actually very familiar with how Korean companies work, but I do want to respect my translator's opinions, and that's really it. Like, if anyone wants to tell me like, oh, I want to pick up this series, then I think you should go ahead. But as an editor and as also a writer, like, I think you should do your best and not just half-ass something when you go see a fragment, you just ignore it and say whatever. Or when you see a reference, you just expect readers to get it on their own. I'm not saying that like no one can do a better job than I can, but I'm asking that anyone that does try their hand in this gives it their best effort, because I think I've given my best effort for over 1.5 years. And even though I may not have been active for all of that 1.5 years, I think you owe it to the community, yourself especially, and the novel to do it justice.
Yeah, if you're gonna pick this up as a fan of this book, then like treat it correctly.
no, I have to
Yeah.
agree. I incredibly appreciate your dedication thus far, and both you and the translator, in bringing this out, because it's been such an incredible read for us to enjoy and become attached to.
Yeah, I think I've gone through 4 different translators. Like, only 2 have been around for actually a really long time. One is his name is just M. It's just a letter, and he was the translator for like 1 all the way through like 120 something.
Wow.
And I have no idea where he is. He's like, my only way of communicating with him was to like ask Light Novel Bastion's admin to contact him for me.
Wow.
And then there was like a couple of other translators, and then there was Boko, who now works on Stop Friendly Fire on Wuxia World.
Okay.
I remember
And-
Boko.
Yeah, I'm sorry I don't read his novel, because for me, I think it just sounds a little too cheesy for my taste. Like, that's just personal preference. If it's a great novel, it's a great novel. Like, you do you. But
There's a lot to read
our
out there,
fans will
so
tell
I
us.
get it.
like, sometimes I really wish that I could be official. Like, sometimes I wish I can just go up to Wuxia World and say like, "Hey, I want to do this," but I don't think my heart is into just like, I want to make things better for myself. Because if you take up fan translating, part of your incentive may be that, but I think the whole novel translation community realizes that novel translation and editing is not a viable job. Like, holy shit.
Yeah,
I think
no.
the Reddit post were looking at
It
my
could be
like,
if it were done right, but
no way. And I'm just like, we're not asking you to pay for a living. Like, I have school. I'm in high school. Like, as much as I can use the extra cash, like, I don't need it.
people seem particularly galled by the $170 a chapter. But then right underneath that, there was a guy that was like, "Yeah, but 2 cents a word is actually pretty good. Like, that's like discounted even. Like, yeah, guy, Like that's the point that we're trying to make.
But I think that I think the big numbers just scared everyone off, and there was just a lack of clarity, and for that, I'm sorry.
I mean, dude, like you guys are you're young. It happens, you know.
I know I'm
Tact
young.
is a thing y'all don't have.
I'm not sure how old my translator actually is. We talk, but we don't go into personal details.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
I mean, that's fair.
I think.
But I mean, but one thing about the novel translation community and the fans that consume it, and the fact that it's so grassroots, and it's grassroots it's a niche within a niche what we consume, right?
Yeah.
So it's a small scene, and there are people out there willing to support the people who put out. I know, speaking just from my podcast and people in the podcast and the other hosts, we put our time, our effort, our money into this because we care and we respect what you guys do, you know? So, you know, I think anyone who wants to go out and translate, edit, get the stuff, you know, because you're doing something that I can't easily do, you know? So it's appreciative.
You guys are unsung heroes, and we really do appreciate the work you guys put on.
We're singing them.
I think I get that a reader's perspective and a translator's perspective on a novel's release rate may be so different.
Sure.
I lived on both sides of the spectrum. I know what it means to wait an entire week just for one chapter, or have to edit 1 week for the edit one chapter for the week and have it be so exhausting, but have someone read through it in 5-10 minutes. And that disparity always makes me smile a little bit, and it also confuses me. But I have massive respect for people who have consistently provided really quality translations. A lot of the Wuxia World ones are good. I think the Novels Extra has such amazing translators.
But I've been hearing a lot of people
I know one of them. His username is Illidan Stormrage, after the Dota player.
That's a Warcraft character.
Really?
Yeah, Illidan Stormrage is a Warcraft character. You're too young. It's fine.
No, man, it's like a third level of reference. That's fantastic.
Oh my god.
I don't know. The only Illidan Stormrage I remember is from the early days of Dota. So I assume that's what his name is based on.
Oh my god.
So,
yeah, man. No, you're lucky. You never fell into the WoW hole. That's great for you. That's more time for editing. That's great.
Yeah, I may not be in
doing something meaningful.
The Warcraft hole.
Warcraft 2 came out in 1995. I was too young to experience that when it initially came out. So I can only imagine you probably weren't even thought of.
Yeah, so I may not be in the World of Warcraft hole, but I sure as hell in the League of Legends hole, you know?
I did that for a while. Dropped out around season 2 or 3, though.
But we just being on the producing side of this industry, I would say, for lack of a better word, it's hard. It's really hard. And for the link that I just posted in the chat, it has all the chapters up to 200, and I'm sorry, but 199 is such a fucking cliffhanger. But then you have 200, so everything is okay. But I don't know if Basil is going to continue translating at I would call this a respectable rate, just for a lack of a better word. But I know that if there is a chapter that someone wants me to edit, you just hit me up in my email or my PMs. Tutorial has been my life work. It's okay, it's been 1.5 years, but I feel like I've devoted my entire life to this series.
I mean, considering how large of a percentage of your life it probably is, yeah, I can understand.
School's a
Life's
full-time
work.
job, so like you're at the first part in your life where you're old enough to have free time to yourself, and you're pretty much devoting it, like you said yourself, like 70 to 100% of that free time to it. So I absolutely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to like hit me up, you hit me up in my Discord, you hit me up in my emails, because I don't know what happens past 200 any more than anyone else other than my translator, really. Like, I am dying to know what happens as much as the next person.
Fantastic.
Well, hopefully we can facilitate that. We got people when they're listening.
I was going to say, is there anything you're doing in your life that you'd like to plug, or anything that you'd like to talk about, bring attention to?
I mean, I think novel editing has just been my entire life up to this point. Because this is going to get a little personal, but like, I don't have that many friends at school. I'm kind of a nerd. I try to do my best academically, and I'm sort of up there, but not really. So this has literally just been my entire life. And I may be on Rebirth Online World right now, but if there are any aspiring like translators, editors, proofreaders, anyone who just wants to get involved with this scene, like I would recommend them to not join Rebirth Online World as my first part, like, but that's definitely an option. Just really ask around. Tell people, instead of just lurking behind your screen, that I think I have skill, and find your own worth in your skill, because I think the only reason a lot of people, like, there are a lot of like really bad translations, like the syntax is terrible, there's grammar is absolute garbage or something, is because there aren't enough people who realize that their English skills are good, that they have the potential to do this, and it's just a matter of dedication. And dedication is easier said than done, but given the amount of feedback that I've received, which is really not a lot, but it's the small things that count, and given the like how welcoming the community can be, like how openly they embrace someone who might be less fortunate, who might be just a lurker, who might have problems, or who's just someone who's just a novel enthusiast, or someone that's just into Asian culture. Like, I think you should really considering just going to a local group. What I mean by local is just like, a group that you read at, and telling them, you know what, I'm willing to try this out. I'm willing to put my work into this, not because I want to get paid, but because I want to do something that can make both the novel and myself feel good, feel worthy.
All right, man. That's awesome. That's a really cool sentiment.
That is a stirring call. Those of you who listen to this podcast and who want to get onto the fucking the business end, go for it.
Reach out. Take a chance.
Wait, actually, a lot of the people who know English better than me by far are actually the people who've never spoken English as their first language. Because when they speak it as a second language, they know the intricacies. They don't learn it naturally. They have to learn it consciously. And I think that makes them way better at editing than I can ever be, because I am a native English speaker. And there
if I'm completely honest, most I wouldn't say no, I'd say most of our listeners are outside of the US. So I would imagine that a lot of the people who listen to this podcast are listening in their second language. So like that's very it's a very appropriate tip.
Yeah, like I'm sorry to be bashing on my high school friends and everyone in America, but some people just who live in the US have absolutely terrible English. Don't sell yourself short.
That's true, though. That's 100% true.
Yeah, that's quite true. Yeah.
As a man who loves him some English and did a lot of English and went to college with honors English. I am actually pretty offended by that, but it's fine.
I'm sorry, but
It's
He
fine
didn't
though.
say that everyone was bad at English, just that there's a
lot
lot
of
of bad English.
people are.
And, like, I see enough
Yeah.
texts and posts on social media to absolutely agree with that.
Yeah,
Yeah. I'm not gonna throw out shade, but
It sounds like you kind of already did there, bud.
You did.
Sorry.
I think this is a good point
You
to
have
close out the
to
podcast.
stop.
Drop the mic. Y'all can't type. Y'all can't syntax trash. No grammar. That's how we end it.
Yep.
yeah, no, but actually, like, never sell yourself short. I think part of novel translation is really discovering yourself. I didn't actually realize how good my English was until I really edited and I noticed the difference between unedited versions and edited versions. And it's hard to realize, but once you get past it and you tell yourself, like, wow, I improved on all of these things, it's not just like, oh, I edited for so and so group. It's, I learned something and I did it completely voluntarily, and this is going to help me in life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
So
that's yeah, man. That's an exciting, like, it's an exciting thing to hear that really all it takes is the want to do it.
yeah,
That's what I found as I've gotten older and experienced more things, is that it's the will to do something is usually the first and last thing that's really necessary to make something happen.
definitely.
So let's bring it home, guys.
So yeah, I'm gonna be posting the link somewhere. Like, we honestly don't want, or at least my translator doesn't want to be liable. I frankly don't give a shit. Like, I am.
Yeah.
I mean, not to advertise the Cheating Underground guys, but maybe you could get in contact with them.
Oh, I've actually never been on Cheetah Underground before.
It's hard to get there.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
I don't see why we couldn't post the link to the Google Drive in the comment or the description of the podcast.
Let's not do that yet. Let's find out how his translator feels, and if he gives us permission, then we'll do that. But if not, we won't.
Definitely.
Yeah, because like it's not directly hosted by us. We could put it like in a paste bin or something. I don't know, man. There's options.
Let's play it safe, and let's just end it here, and we can talk about that after we turned off the recording.
Fair enough.
All right. Everybody, thank you so much for listening and being with us. If you'd like to know how to reach us, listen to one of our other episodes. We go over it in all of them. But if you want to help us out, give us a comment, rate, subscribe us to us on whatever podcast you use.
Check out our Discord.
We have a Discord.
Later.
It's so true, though. There's a link, please.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a great time. Thanks for listening.
Tiger Rollercoaster Productions. Tigers are scary. You try to get off.
Well, that was an exciting interview, wasn't it? Pyrenose had a lot of good stuff to say, and we learned a lot. The exciting thing that happened is he gave us those last 7, 8 chapters of Tutorial is Too Hard. You can find those in the description of our podcast. It's nested amongst all of our other links, like our Twitter and our Facebook. And by the way, if you had followed us on our Discord, you would have been able to get these chapters a little bit earlier because we were talking about it in there with the fans that have already joined. You'll be able to find that link also down in the description below. Last little bit of news is we are considering the Patreon thing. We have one essentially set up. It's just a matter of interest. So if you guys are interested, we would happily set it up. Let us know. Reach out to us on Twitter or Facebook. That's at Tiger Coaster on Twitter, or you can just look up Tiger Rollercoaster on Facebook. Very easy. There are also links. See you guys next time. It'll be a regular episode again, or maybe even a Nights. But it's going to be, yeah, you'll see us soon. Talk to you then.